Good evening, America. If you're listening or watching, you know it's Rabbi Block that's talking. And I want to talk about something that affects every conversation happening right now about Israel, about Jewish identity, and about the Middle East. I want to talk specifically about history. What happens when history gets rewritten? And what happens when enough people repeat a lie confidently, so confidently and so many times that people really think it's the truth? So, my opening question, can you change what actually happened just by saying something different happened? The answer, of course, is no. You can't. Yet, people try this all the time. And actually, they're very successful. So to say that you can't actually change history by saying something different, it's not true. The perception of the history changes, but the history doesn't change. And so when it comes to Jewish history, history of Israel, the effort to rewrite the past is very well organized. Well, let's start at the very beginning, because most of you, good, thoughtful, well-meaning people, have never actually examined where the basic assumptions come from. And we don't have the time. We can't start researching the history of Israel, of Palestine, the Ottoman Empire, the Bible. It's just mind-boggling. And so we are bombarded on college campuses, news coverage, political speeches, celebrities, politicians, and they say things with confidence, and we trust them and we believe them. So let's start with the name itself. Palestine is not an ancient Arab name for an Arab homeland. It's a Roman invention. After the Romans crushed the Jewish revolt in 135 BC, 135 of the Common Era, currently, the Emperor Hadrian wanted to punish the Jews, and more than punish them, he wanted to erase them. Erase their connection to their own land, so he renamed it. He reached back to the ancient Philistines. They're extinct. I don't think anyone has a Philistine passport. I don't think there are any Philistines around anymore. But Hadrian used the name as an insult. So he called the land Syria Palestinia. It was deliberate. It was psychological warfare in the ancient world. And the bitter irony is that the name stuck. Through the Byzantine period, through the Ottoman Empire, through the British Mandate, there has never been a country, there has never been a people named Palestine. It was a geographic label of an area. So what were the Arab people of that? People that live there, what did they call themselves? They didn't use the word Palestinians. They called themselves Arabs or Syrians. They identified by the tribe, the clan, or the village. That's not my interpretation. That's what their leaders say. Between 1920 and 1960, the leaders of the Arab population in the land rejected the very idea of a Palestinian nation. They denied that Palestine was a country. They openly identified themselves as part of the broader Arab world. For 40 years, the Arab population saw themselves not as Palestinians, as a member of a tribe, as Egyptian, as Syrian, but never as Palestinians. Well, here's when things began to shift. The Arab League's official representative to United Nations in 1950 stated simply on the record that Palestine was nothing but southern Syria. Southern Syria. Now, in 1956, he said Palestine didn't exist as a nation. But then he went on to help found the PLO in 1964. 8 years later, he was helping to build an organization whose entire premise was the opposite of what he had said before. The contradiction isn't a footnote in history. That's the story. So speaking of 1964, let's stay there for a moment, because the founding date of the PLO tells us something critical that never gets really discussed. The PLO was founded in 1964. Israel did not control the West Bank or Gaza until 1967. So here is the question you have to sit with. What exactly was the PLO founded to liberate? Not the West Bank, didn't exist. Not Gaza, it wasn't. Liberate Israel itself. The organization's founding goal was not the liberation from occupation. It was liberation from Israel's existence entirely. Now, 1964, also the year something else happened that most of us have never heard of, but it's one of the most consequential events in shaping our present-day conflict. In 1964, Yasser Arafat visited Moscow, met with the KGB. What followed was a propaganda campaign, deliberate, sophisticated, and extraordinarily effective, that permanently altered the public discourse. The campaign was built around the invention of a Palestinian people as an oppressed, indigenous population with an ancient right to the land of Israel. Images of refugee camps, desperate civilians, starving children, broadcast all over the world. What was carefully hidden was the fact that many of those refugees were deliberately kept in camps, not because they had nowhere to go, because permanent suffering made for a permanent political weapon. This was a Cold War operation. The Soviets saw a useful tool for undermining a democratic American ally in the Middle East, and Western intellectuals were eager to romanticize the revolution and an anti-colonial struggle, and they swallowed it hook, line, and sinker. The language that we use today has Soviet fingerprints all over it. The framing of Israel as a colonial aggressor, the vocabulary of occupation, none of that emerged organically. It was engineered. Now, I want to ask a question that always stops people cold when I bring it up. Before 1948, who was actually called a Palestinian? Not the Arabs, because they identified with Jordan, they identified with Syria, they identified with Egypt. The people actually called Palestinian were Jews. Jewish institutions openly embraced the label, the Palestine Post, which became the Jerusalem Post. David Ben-Gurion carried a Palestine passport. Golda Meir carried a Palestine passport. So when someone waves around an old Palestine passport as proof of Arab sovereignty, understand what that document actually was. A British colonial passport issued by the Empire. Documents do not create states. Governments do. A geographic name does not equal sovereignty, and repeating a myth does not make it history. So what does the actual historical record show about Jewish presence in the land? The answer is everything. Overwhelming, multi-sourced, cross-referenced, everything going back thousands of years. So the Ottoman Empire, which controlled the region for centuries, was famously meticulous for keeping records. They taxed everything and everyone. Those records show continuous Jewish populations living in the land throughout their rule. It's not a religious argument. It's not theology. It's pure bureaucracy. Taxes don't lie. Beyond that, archaeology, ancient texts, written history, all confirm the presence of a thriving Jewish civilization in ancient Israel, centuries before the rise of Christianity, centuries before the rise of Islam. Temples, kingdoms, languages, calendars, all rooted in that specific piece of land. For over 2,000 years, through exile, dispersion, persecution, Jews prayed towards Jerusalem 3 times a day, facing the city. It's not colonialism. It's a continuous expression of connection to a homeland in human history. So how is that so many of us, educated, well-meaning, goodwill people, have come to believe the opposite? Part of the answer is our own educational system. In 1963, researcher Michael Bard documented how American history textbooks were already distorting this history, essentially teaching that there was almost no Jews living in what is now Israel before 1948. Those textbooks were never corrected. The misinformation got baked in. Generations of students learned a false history, but there was no reason to question it. But there's another part of the answer that goes much deeper. Many people embrace anti-Israel, it's kind of bizarre narratives, not because they studied anything, because the narrative gives them something they want, an easy moral identity, a clear victim, a clear villain, a way to feel like they're on the right side without doing any of the work, research, studying. Once that happens, unfortunately, the narrative becomes part of our moral identity. And evidence, that's irrelevant. Don't confuse me with the facts. I know what I believe. I know what I read. I know what I'm being told. So what would I like you to do? If you don't want to believe me, don't believe someone else, go to the sources. Study the Sykes-Picot Agreement, Treaty. Look at the UN when Yasser Arafat appeared there. Look at the history of the Ottoman Empire. So if you would like, don't let repetition substitute for evidence. I've presented here what I've researched. And you do it. But don't, under any circumstances, negate me and believe someone else without doing the research. And I don't agree with everything that Netanyahu is doing. I don't agree with everything the present Israeli government is doing. The expanding, the wars, everything. But those are political events. And that doesn't change the existence of the state of Israel over time. So what we're watching in real time is a deliberate rewriting of Jewish history, the erasure of an indigenous people, the Jews, the inversion of victim and aggressor, the transformation of a complex historical reality into a simplistic morality tale designed to justify hatred. And the answer is not more noise. The answer is more history. Israel does not need to invent its history. It has, in the stones, the scrolls, the archaeology, the ancient texts, and yes, the Ottoman tax rolls. History cannot be rewritten into existence. It's already there. We just have to be willing to look at it honestly and to be able to turn and say, Israel has a right to exist, and I don't agree with the Netanyahu government. I don't believe in it in its expansion. But I do believe in the state of Israel should exist, and I believe that there should be a homeland for all the displaced peoples, but not one based on hate, not one based on destruction, but a homeland for everyone based on moral respect and based on respect for one's neighbors.